All right, Socrates Part II. So in the first video, left off with this idea of questioning and answering, and how Socrates challenges for us to examine our lives. Right, and I repeatedly said that the unexamined life is not worth living. And if we really take that quote to heart, if we really challenge ourselves with it, it's perhaps really difficult, really challenging. Because I think a lot of us are frightened of self-examination. I think we're frightened to examine some of these concepts, some of these ideas that we hold near and dear to our heart, that we just accept them. We haven't challenged them. And so when we think about challenge, when we think about what it is and why it is we believe what it is we believe, perhaps we're led to new conclusions, we're led to new insights. Now, the way that Socrates would go around Athens, he would investigate, and as the book had referenced, he would go around and he would engage in conversation where people would say, well, I claim to know this. I am certain that this is the right way to live. I am certain that that is my friend. Right? And Socrates would be like, well, what do you mean? How do you know they're your friend? What is a friend? Okay? And what has become known what has become known as this kind of question and answering session is often known as the Socratic Method, or a Socratic dialogue. And it's a series of questions and answers that ultimately the questioner, right now I point to myself as Socrates, I ask questions, but I don't give answers. That what it is I'm ultimately doing is trying to draw the answer out from you, from the person that I'm questioning, having you examine what it is you believe, what it is you conceive of. Because ultimately, I don't have all the answers, neither did Socrates, but he ultimately wanted to show that the process of examination, the process of investigation, is one that is very fruitful and one that ought not be ignored or taken lightly. And to that end, we get this really nice representation in what's called the Euthyphro. And so if you all clicked that link on the day on today's page, you have access to this dialogue. And it's complicated. It's old Greek. It's ancient translated Greek, and so there's some really strange language in here. And you're welcome to kind of read through it. You're welcome to skim it. And I'm only going to focus on the first couple of pages here. Because ultimately, what it does is it shows nicely kind of this process of questioning and answering. Okay. So again, this person's name that Socrates is having a conversation with is Euthyphro. That's the Euthyphro name, Euthyphro, Socrates. And as you can see, Euthyphro written by Plato, who was Socrates' student. And we'll talk more about that in a couple of lectures, maybe the next lecture actually. Now, what's happening in this dialogue is that Euthyphro, Euthyphro is sitting on the steps of the court, of the Athenian court. Okay? Socrates is walking by, and ultimately Socrates engages him in a conversation, engages him in a question. Okay? And so on page 2, right? Pardon me. Basically, they're having this conversation, and ultimately Socrates says, well, who are you here prosecuting? You say you're here to prosecute someone, to take someone to court. Okay? And then Euthyphro says, Socrates says, who is he? Euthyphro says, my father. Socrates says, your father, my good man. Yes, Euthyphro. And what is he accused of? Of murder, Socrates, says Euthyphro. By the powers, Euthyphro, how little does the common herd know of the nature of right and truth. A man must be an extraordinary man and have made great strides in wisdom before he could have seen his way to bring such an action. Indeed, Socrates, he must, says Euthyphro. And so what's happening here is that a little bit down the line, Euthyphro says that his father has killed a slave, right? And Euthyphro's father should be prosecuted. His family doesn't want Euthyphro to prosecute his father, and kind of against the tradition of Athens, a slave was a piece of property. One can dispose of slaves the way that one would dispose of other property, right? Very inhumanely, as we would argue that very unethical. And ultimately, Euthyphro says, well, I'm prosecuting my father. My father and family are angry with me for taking the part of the murderer, yet they admit that he bound his father because he wickedly... oh, no, backside. Skip a page. Sorry to me. And my father and family are angry with me for taking the part of the murderer and prosecuting my father. They say that he did not kill him, and that if he did, dead man was a murderer, but I ought not take any notice, for the son is impious to the prosecutor. They say that a son is impious who prosecutes a father, which shows Socrates how little they know what the gods think about piety and impiety. Now, piety is this idea of holiness, okay? Of what is pious, what is right, what is just. Holy, pious, just. You can kind of use those words synonymously. So anyway, Euthyphro says, I have the knowledge of piety. I've got it. And I am doing that which is pious, taking my father to court. His family is angry. Okay? But Euthyphro says, how little they know what the gods think about piety and impiety. Socrates responds, good heavens, Euthyphro! And is your knowledge of religion and of the things pious and impious so very exact that, supposing the circumstances to be as you state them, you are not afraid afraid lest you too, see, old Greek is weird, may be doing an impious thing and bringing the actions against your father, blah, 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 blah. Euthyphro says, the best of Euthyphro and that which distinguishes him, Socrates, from other men is his exact knowledge of all such matters. All such matters. And then Socrates, kind of a bit pompous, says, rare friend, I think that I cannot do better than be your disciple. Okay? And so what's happening here is Socrates is kind of getting more and more investigative and more interested in Euthyphro as it relates to Euthyphro's claim that he has true knowledge of piety and impiety. And ultimately, Socrates is kind of starting to work with him, starting to kind of show him perhaps, that Euthyphro doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay? And so what's happening here is we go down a little bit in the paragraph, and Socrates says, and what is piety? And what is impiety? And with that, they have this long conversation that you're welcome to, read through and try to parse out. You're welcome to search out other video clips online that might be helpful to kind of unpack this. But essentially what happens is there's this very long Socratic dialogue where ultimately Socrates asks really tough questions that Plato can't answer. Pardon me, not Plato, Euthyphro. Socrates asks questions that Euthyphro can't answer exactly. Ultimately, Socrates' method showing that Euthyphro, he doesn't know. And it was really ignorant for him to claim that he did. Okay? That sure, we can have some sort of guessing, we can have some sort of foundation, but to claim ultimate knowledge, to claim ultimate certainty about a thing, whether it be piety, impiety, holiness, unholiness, etc., is a bit ignorant. And what we get from this approach, from the Socratic dialogue approach, is we get this process which is often called the process of negation, of the taking away. And I like to think of it in terms of like an onion, where I have this outer layer. Oh, excuse me. See, that's why video things are weird, is because that's inescapable on my end, where you could be sneezing, you could be coughing, half awake. I would have no idea. I have no clue. Anyway, thinking about Socrates and thinking about the Socratic method as it relates to this process of negation. And the process of negation is interesting insofar as I think of it as an onion, Where an onion, you have the outermost layer. And you can start asking a question where you start saying, okay, well, tell me about what it means to be a friend. Okay, well, a friend is loyal. All right. So let's peel back that layer. What does it mean to be loyal? Well, loyalty is defined or perhaps understood as being there when your friends need you, of not questioning, blah, 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 blah. And again, we peel another layer. And so as this process unfolds, what it is we get and what it is we understand is trying to get down to the very center of that onion, the very center of whatever it is we're trying to investigate. And sometimes that might be impossible. But nevertheless, the process and the investigation is vitally important. Vitally important insofar as it lets us examine ourselves. It lets us examine our lives. And that's really foundational for Socratic movement. The unexamined life is not worth living. His challenge to know thyself. And ultimately, another quote that's often associated with Socrates is that the wisest of all humans is he or she who knows they know nothing. The wisest of all humans is he or she who knows they know nothing. Sounds strange, right? But ultimately, what we get from that is this focus on perhaps our own ignorance and recognizing that, yeah, we can know a lot of things, but to claim certainty, to claim ultimate knowledge, is something we ought to be skeptical of. We ought to be investigative of, and we ought not settle. And so for your assignment with Socrates, I think it's tomorrow, Friday, it might be today. I'm sorry about being a bit unclear on that. I need to double check. But examining this idea of knowing thyself, of the examining, of knowing thyself and of looking at the unexamined life is not worth living. So how does one examine oneself? How does one live a life full of the richness, full of the fruitfulness of philosophical and personal investigation? I think it's a really challenging but important thing to start thinking about. And that's the take-home, in my perspective, of where Socrates points us. And then next week, we'll start to look at Plato, Socrates' most influential student by measure. Before I close this video, I received word, and I'll shoot this out in an email, but apparently BB Learn is going to be down, being updated or something, Sunday afternoon through Monday morning, 8 a.m. on Monday. So I think currently I have your first papers due on Sunday night at 11:59. I will make a change on when they are due, probably Monday sometime, just because you will not be able to turn them in Sunday night because Blackboard will be down. Additionally, today is your first day getting on the group threads, and with the group discussion board, how I would like that to go and how I expect you all to investigate and to receive full credit and full participation points on the discussion board. You need to be engaged, you need to be active, you need to be focused, and not just say, yeah, I agree with Bob. Bob's right, or something like that. It needs to be thoughtful, it needs to be well thought out, and not just in passing. And again, providing a couple of different responses to a couple of different students, trying to have some sort of philosophical investigative thread is of utmost importance. And you'll be graded on the engagement, on the intentionality rather, of how you participate in the discussion board. So good luck with that. Be respectful, be cordial, and ultimately focus in on how we can, again, facilitate philosophical growth. And one way to do that is by acknowledging that the unexamined life is not worth living.